and welcome to the third and final instalment of our Get Ready for EPA workshop series. In this workshop, we will cover tips for the day of assessment. Okay, so before we begin, we'll give a bit of an overview of your two presenters and a bit about DSW, your endpoint assessment organisation. So my name's Jake Tween. I'm Director of Apprenticeships with DSW, and I've been employed in the learning and development, further and higher education space since 2006.
Hello everybody, I'm Alison Lyon. I'm the Head of Apprenticeships at DSW. I have been working in this industry for just over 11 years now.
So at DSW, we have 25 years of experience in the learning and development space. We endpoint assess close to 40 different apprenticeship standards. And we've now carried out endpoint assessment, or EPA, for 12,000 individual apprentices. So we work with over 200 training providers. So that includes colleges, independent training providers, universities. And at any given time, we're actively supporting and delivering endpoint assessment on behalf of close to 2,500 different employers. Okay, so we've got a few things to cover. Firstly, we'll talk about administration, so how to make sure that you have the relevant links and things like that for your assessment. We'll talk about mental preparation and some of the techniques you can use to make sure that you're in the right space mentally. What to bring with you and what the different rules are around that. Setting the right environment, so making sure that the room that you're in is appropriate for your assessment. Testing the equipment. And then finally, some tips for how to conduct yourself during the assessment.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about administration, give you some hints and tips on how you can be prepared for that. So all of our assessments will take place on some kind of video conferencing platform. So that might be Zoom, WebEx or Teams. We will send a meeting invite out to you well ahead of that assessment. So make sure you have that link with you on the day. If you don't have that link well in advance of your assessment, then please flag to your training provider so they can arrange for that to be sent out to you. So make sure that you've got log-on details and passwords for any of the systems that you're going to be accessing. Remember, it's a timed assessment, so you don't want to be searching around for login details or resetting your passwords during your assessment. And make sure that you have our head office phone number with you. And your training provider's contact details. So if anything untoward does happen, you're able to get in touch with us. If you don't have our details, they will be shared with you at the end of this workshop. Some assessments will have a panel member join your professional discussion or an interview. If that is the case, then please make sure that the panel members have the right links to the meetings as well. Each of the panel members will have a specific role in that assessment. It could be that they're there to add context and provide clarification around your organisational's policies, or it may be that they are there to ask some questions. Their role will be specified in our toolkit. So make sure that they've had sight of that toolkit. Make sure they know what their role is and what is required of them on the day. So make sure that you've got a room booked for your assessment and allow yourself a little bit of contingency. So don't just book the room for the exact time of the assessment. Allow a little bit either side so that you can get yourself in the room, get set up and make sure everything's ready. And in case there's any issues and you overrun a little bit, allow a little bit of contingency at the end. Make sure that people know that you're in an assessment. So you might be doing it at home, you might be doing it in the office, but make sure that anybody else that's in the building with you is aware that you are in an assessment. You know, you don't want somebody walking in the room during an assessment. You don't want any sort of distractions and noise coming from outside. Print a sign off and stick it on the door if you need to. You know, you can tell people you're doing an assessment, but if there's a sign on the door, it's a really good deterrent and it will stop people knocking or, you know, just walking in the room. And make sure that reasonable adjustments are in place. So, you know, some people qualify for an adjustment. So it might be that you've allowed extra time during an assessment. So DSW have a policy that we administer these adjustments through, and we will make sure that they are in place well ahead of your assessment. So if you qualify for one, make sure that your provider has given us those details. Make sure that we have put those adjustments in place for you.
So next we're going to talk about mental preparation and some of the techniques that you can use ahead of your assessment to make sure that you're in the best mental state of mind. So first one seems fairly obvious, but just make sure that you're well rested, that you've had a good night's sleep the night before, because being well rested will help you to concentrate, and it'll also help you to feel more relaxed and able to focus on the tasks at hand. So choose the best time of day for you for your assessment. So if you're doing an online exam, usually you can just book any day and any time of day that you choose. If you haven't yet booked your assessment for, say, an interview or a professional discussion, do try and negotiate a time with your training provider, with your assessor that best suits you. I think the majority of people perform better early in the morning, for example, whereas some of us might feel a little bit tired after lunch or in the afternoon. So do try and choose the best time that's going to allow you to showcase the best version of you on the day. Again, it sounds obvious, but make sure that you eat and drink enough beforehand. I myself am guilty of this. I might have an important meeting to go to and I'll get distracted with the day-to-day stuff and work and meetings and phone calls and things. Turn up for the meeting and then realise that I haven't actually had anything to eat. So just make sure you take the time and that you ring fence the time in your diary to do that and look after yourself before your assessment. So it's really important, and a lot of apprentices forget to do this, but just bring a glass of water with you, especially if you're in an assessment where you're going to be required to do a lot of talking. So if you're doing a presentation or an interview, for example, I think most of us get a dry mouth after talking for quite a while, so just bring a glass of water with you. If you do bring a drink in, it's important that you put it into kind of a clear glass or a clear bottle. Avoid taking in any sort of receptacle that's got sort of a lot of writing on it. Really important that you leave a rest gap between work and assessment. So I think Alison's tip around having 15 minutes either side is really important. And I think that time ahead of your assessment is vital for getting you into the right state of mind for the assessment. So don't book in a meeting or a call with a customer, for example, that's due to end the minute before your assessment begins, because you don't know what's going to happen in that meeting. You might get stressed. You might end up with a big list of actions that you need to write down and think about. Just afford yourself that time and that space ahead of the assessment so that you can rest and get into the best state of mind. And each of us has our own preferred techniques that might put us to rest. So you might want to go out and get some fresh air ahead of your assessment. There might be certain sounds or smells that help you to relax. Really just practicing those techniques around mindfulness and restfulness. Really important that if you have a body of evidence that you're going to be referring back to during your assessment, is that you take the time ahead of your assessment to really go through that body of evidence and through any preparatory notes that you've got. So for example, if you're doing a portfolio-based professional discussion, really important that you take the time to review that portfolio ahead of the discussion so that when you ask questions and you're asked to talk about things, it's fluid, it's natural, and you're not having to refer back through your notes all of the time because actually it's all fresh in your mind and you've taken the time to prepare fully. And then the last one, be early, is really important. It's really important that you be early so that if there are any technical difficulties or the room isn't quite how you expected it to be, that you can fix those things and still have plenty of time to kind of just calm down ahead of your assessment and practice those techniques that we talked about. But it is really more than anything else about giving you that mental space. If you're at work and you're having a busy day, something might have happened that's annoyed you or frustrated you. You need to get out of that mindset and into the mindset of being relaxed and ready for your assessment. And the only way you can guarantee that is giving yourself that buffer and making sure that you're early for that assessment.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about what you can bring to your assessment with you. So we have various documents at DSW that will give you information about what you can bring to your assessment. So you'll have heard us refer to our conditions for live assessment and our toolkits. So you need to have sight of these documents because they will provide that clarity for you on what you can and can't bring to your assessment. So some assessments will allow you to bring notes in, maybe paper and pens. We have different rules on things like headphones. So have a look at those documents and make sure you're familiar with what is acceptable for your assessment, and make sure you bring that equipment with you on the day. So some of our standards allow you to bring things in, such as a copy of your portfolio. So if you're doing a portfolio interview or professional discussion, then you will want to bring some form of portfolio in with you. So that might be your full portfolio, and you might want to access that on screen when you're talking about it. Or it might be that you want to bring a summary of that in. It really depends what works for you, but make sure you bring it along, and make sure, as Jake says, you've reviewed that and you're very familiar with it. You're going to be talking about it, so have a good read through, refresh yourself. So bring a list of the assessment criteria and amplification along. That's the criteria that you're being assessed against. So have a read through it, make sure that you're familiar with it. As we've said before, if it is an interview or a professional discussion, then you can ask your assessor which question the criteria relates to. So make sure you've got that document with you. And bring along your mapping document. So that's the document that you will use to tell us where in your portfolio or your project we can find that evidence that you're referring to. So bring that along. Then when the assessor asks you a question, you'll be able to easily locate that evidence and refer to it and point to it during the session. So we talked in the last workshop about making notes. So bring notes along, but make sure they're concise, make sure that they are legible. It is a timed assessment, so you need to focus on the questions and the responses that you're given. What we don't want is you to have your head down and you're searching through reams of notes, trying to find the example that you want to refer to. Use your notes in your mock as well. So take them along, use them, and then you'll get used to navigating around your notes, and you have opportunity then after your mock to refresh those notes and make any changes that you feel are needed. So whatever documents you bring, whether that be in digital form or in paper form, make sure that you have them with you on your assessment. So maybe make yourself a little checklist and use that in the mock, and then you can rely on that in your live assessment. You won't be able to leave the room once your assessment has started, so it's key that whatever you need with you is brought in at the start of the assessment.
Thank you, Alison. So in the next section, we'll talk about setting the right environment for your assessment. So that's regardless of the assessment type. It might be an exam, it might be an interview, a presentation, a professional discussion. There are certain principles and rules that are in place around making sure that you're in a comfortable and a safe space, but that you adhere to the relevant conditions. So as with the previous slide, the main piece of advice that we can give you is to check the DSW documents, because the rules will differ slightly from one apprenticeship standard to another. So the first port of call for you would be the DSW toolkit, but also do refer to DSW's conditions for live assessment. If you haven't had access to those documents or you're not sure where to find them, speak to your training provider and they'll be able to give you access to the latest versions of those documents. In essence, what we're looking for is a professional setting for your exam, for your assessment. So you mustn't be in a public space. You should be in a private space where you're free from distractions. You might be at home. You might have somewhere in your workplace, like an office. But the important thing is it's professional. And actually, I would say make it as neutral as you can. So it's worth bearing in mind that at the beginning of your assessment, the assessor is going to ask you to scan the room with your laptop, so that they can see that you're in the appropriate environment. And during the assessment, you'll need to have your camera on throughout, and you won't be permitted to use a virtual background or to blur your background. So in particular, if you're doing your assessment at home, just make sure that you're happy that the assessor's going to be able to see everything that's in the room that you're in. Nothing worse than somebody sitting down for an assessment and not realising that they're going to be required to do that. So you might have the best plans in the world, and you might have done your mock assessments and tested all of the equipment, but every now and then we all know that something can go wrong that wasn't planned. So it's really important that you have in place your own contingency plans. We don't necessarily dictate what they would be because it really depends on you and your employer and your different circumstances. But I think the key thing is making sure that you've got backup equipment and making sure that you know who to contact in the event that you need to. So if you're, say, using a piece of work equipment, you might have your IT department's contact details to hand in case you have any technical difficulties. Really important that you have the DSW office number. So, for example, if you can't get logged on or you log on and the assessor isn't there, you can ring the DSW office, and provided it's within our working hours, somebody will answer that phone and they'll answer it straight away. It never rings more than twice. You won't be put into a queue. You won't be speaking to a robot. You'll be speaking to a real person, and they'll be able to help you very quickly there and then. The DSW contact details are on the final slide of this workshop as well, so I would jot them down and make sure you've got them to hand. But some of the things that can and sometimes do go wrong are connectivity issues. So you might have tested your broadband and it was brilliant, and then all of a sudden the Wi-Fi drops out or you don't have as good a connection as you had. So just make sure you know what to do in those circumstances. So, for example, have a number on hand to be able to contact your IT department. Hardware problems, so difficulties with your laptop, or some of the functionality like sharing screens, audio. Again, know who it is that you need to speak to if that happens. Environmental disruptions. So more often than not, you can prevent these from happening by following some of the techniques that Alison shared around really simple things like letting people know that you're in an assessment, putting a do not disturb sign on the door, but just be ready that if it does happen and somebody walks in and hasn't read the sign, that you're calm and you deal with it as and when it happens, and it's not something that catches you out. And similarly, personal issues. So, I mean, this could be a whole host of different things, but obviously we all have lives outside of work and different things that might be affecting us. And some of those things might affect your assessment. So just making sure that you know how to deal with them if and when they crop up. And it might be something that you want to share with the assessor at the beginning of the assessment, to be honest, to let them know that that's a potential issue. And last minute changes. So, for example, you've got everything planned, it's booked in, and then you have an emergency at work or a fire alarm goes off. Just be prepared that these they very, very rarely do happen. But if they do, just make sure that you know what to do in that situation so that you don't panic and you deal with it calmly, and you can explain to the assessor what's going on, and they'll be very patient with you and they'll do everything that they can to support you.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about testing your equipment. So we strongly recommend that you do some mock assessments before the date of your live assessment. One of the things that the mock assessment will allow you to do is to test your equipment. Make sure that you've done that ahead of the assessment day. You need to know that everything is going to work and that you understand how it works. But it's a really good idea to do it again ahead of your assessment. So on just ahead of your live assessment. So it's key that you allow that little bit of extra time so that you can do that. And make sure that your device is fully charged and operational. It might sound silly, but you'd be surprised how many people head into a meeting and then have to dash off because the laptop battery's dying. So make sure your device is charged. Have your charger with you. Make sure that everything is operating as it should be. And check your connectivity to the internet ahead of your assessment starting. You know, if you've done a mock, you'll have already tested it. You'll have made sure everything works together. But check it again on the day just to make sure that nothing has changed. And if you do it 15 minutes ahead of your assessment, if there is an issue, it allows you to go to your contingency plan and to get that in place ahead of your assessment starting. So retest the functionality. So I'm sure you'll have done it ahead of your assessment and you'll have done it in your mocks, but have another go. Make sure that your camera's working. Make sure that your volume's turned up. Make sure you know how to change the settings if you need to. You will have to screen share during your assessment, so make sure you know how to use that functionality. I think allowing yourself that little bit of extra time ahead of an assessment so that you can check and verify everything is key.
For the final part of today's workshop, we're going to share with you some techniques to use during your assessment. Now, the first thing sounds fairly obvious, but it's really important that you dress appropriately for your assessment. While we want you to feel relaxed and at ease, you should recognize that this is a formal assessment of your competence and professionalism within your role. So you don't necessarily have to dress in formal attire, but you should dress appropriately to your organization or to the role that you carry out. So avoid wearing things like pajamas or sportswear. If you have a live assessment or an online live assessment with a DSW assessor, say a professional discussion or an interview or a presentation, one of the first things the assessor will do is they'll talk you through a housekeeping checklist. And that checklist's there to make sure that you have all of the things that you're entitled to and that you need to get through the assessment. But it'll also do things like making sure that you've got your ID, that you're in the appropriate environment, that you understand the rules and requirements for the assessment. So pay attention to that and it'll make sure that you fulfill all of those requirements. So speak clearly and speak at your rehearsed pace. And we've chosen that phrase very carefully because the only way really that you can know what's the correct pace to use in your assessment is to practice. And the best practice would be to do some mock assessments, to record them and to listen back to yourself. And then you'll know when you're going too quickly or going too slowly, and you'll be able to use that self-appraisal to make sure that you're answering as robustly as you need to and at the right pace so that you're maximizing the time that's available to you in that assessment. Ensure that you're well lit and that you're fully in the frame so that the assessor can see you throughout the assessment. Again, this is an assessment of your professional capability and you might be doing things like exhibiting positive body language and maintaining good eye contact. These are all great things that we'd encourage you to do, but it's important that the assessor can see you doing those things. So I mentioned before, good verbal and body language combined. But last not least, and it sounds easier said than done perhaps, but relax and be yourself and do your best to enjoy the assessment. So we want you to do well. The independent assessor wants you to do well. We want to see the best version of you on the day. We really want you to showcase the work that you've done and how you've gone about it. So we just want to say thank you very much for joining us for this workshop. And Alison and I and everybody at DSW wishes you the best of luck in your assessment and in your future career. Thank you.